Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Daybreak, meeting with the leaders of the US and Japan on the sidelines of a nuclear summit in the Netherlands. President Park calls on all three countries to deal with the North Korean nuclear issue in a united manner. More evidence of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Asian women has come to light. A new report finds the US government concluded years ago that women were systematically forced into sexual servitude during the Second World War. Plus, as part of President Park's deregulation drive, from May, it will no longer be illegal for individuals to renovate commercial trucks into food trucks. Daybreak begins now. Hello and thanks for joining us. To our viewers here in Korea and around the world, it's 6 a.m. on Wednesday, March 26th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom and you're tuned in to Daybreak. Our top story this morning, President Park Geun-hye has called on the need for a coordinated response from South Korea, the United States and Japan against North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Speaking at a trilateral summit with the leaders of the US and Japan on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague, President Park said the North Korean nuclear issue was a grave threat to peace and stability in the surrounding regions. The meeting that took place early Wednesday Korea time marks the first face-to-face meeting between President Park and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe since the two came to power more than 1 year ago. Bilateral relations between Korea and Japan have frayed in recent months due to historical disputes regarding Japan's colonial rule of Korea back in the early 1900s. The meeting, however, was limited to North Korea's nuclear issues. Now, as I just mentioned, the trilateral summit was President Park's first official opportunity to sit down face-to-face with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. However, experts say the meeting will do little to mend the two countries' frosty relations. Hwang Sang-hee reports.
Will Korea-Japan relations take a turn for the better following Tuesday's meeting between President Park Geun-hye and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe? Their trilateral summit with U.S. President Barack Obama on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague was the first official meeting between the two leaders. President Park had refused to meet with Abe until he pledged to uphold Japan's 1993 apology issued to the victims of its wartime sexual enslavement. But most experts say the trilateral meeting will do little to mend strained Korea-Japan relations. This as many believe that Tokyo's recent change in attitude lacks sincerity and has more to do with pressure out of Washington to improve its bilateral ties with Seoul.
Japan tends to behave depending on the circumstances and reveal its real stance again when the situation improves. It's a vicious cycle for Korea-Japan relations that rotates from a temporary mending of relations to a worsening of ties.
Japan's sincerity was put into question following a comment made by one of Abe's close aides last weekend. Just days after the Japanese leader promised to honor the 1993 apology, his special advisor, Koichi Hagiuda, raised the possibility of issuing a new statement over the so-called comfort women issue. He said Tokyo should consider issuing a new political statement if fresh findings emerge while the government verifies how the apology was prepared. Experts say such contradictory actions will only push the two neighbors further apart.
Just as the Japanese government is investigating its 1993 apology despite its pledge to uphold it ahead of the trilateral meeting, a Korea-Japan summit is not a likely possibility anytime soon unless there is a fundamental change in Tokyo's stance.
Besides, there are more occasions lined up in April that could stir up the current diplomatic feud, including an annual spring festival during which Abe may visit the controversial Yasukuni War Shrine again, just as he did in December. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Now, back in the Netherlands, the third nuclear security summit in The Hague came to a close on Tuesday, with the 53 countries taking part. adopting a communique. At this year's summit, world leaders focused on measures to prevent terrorists, criminals and unauthorized personnel from obtaining nuclear materials that could be used in developing nuclear weapons. They also urged countries that have not yet done so to become a party to the Convention of the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material, a key international legal body that addresses nuclear security issues. The leaders also vowed to make continuous efforts to achieve the common goal of strengthening international nuclear security architecture. The next summit will take place in 2016 in the United States. Now, another report has surfaced that could add more weight to the evidence of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Asian women during the Second World War. It shows the United States concluded years ago that women were systematically forced into sexual servitude. Our Son Jung-in reports.
This is a report published in 2006 by the National Archives and Records Administration on behalf of the Nazi War Crimes and Japanese Imperial Government Records Interagency Working Group. Titled Researching Japanese War Crimes, the 222-page report was made after scouring 8.5 million pages of records related to Japanese and Nazi war crimes previously identified by the U.S. government. Included in the report is a description of how the Japanese military contracted private vendors to set up so-called comfort stations for its troops dating back to as early as 1932. The work began in 2000 when Samuel Berger, then National Security Advisor to President Bill Clinton, directed agencies to locate classified records on war crimes committed by agents of the Japanese government from 1931 to 1945. The working group reportedly advised U.S. agencies to pay particular attention to any records and materials related to the Comfort Women program. Comfort women is a term that refers to women and girls forced by the Japanese military to work as prostitutes during World War II. The group sent their findings on to the U.S. Congress in April 2007. Local experts in Korea predict the latest findings may work against the current administration of Shinzo Abe in Japan, which has long been denying that the Comfort Women system involved coercion. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
Now, we have some news just in. We have word that North Korea has fired more missiles into the East Sea, citing military authorities in South Korea. Seoul-based Yonhap News is reporting the North fired 2 mid-range ballistic rockets at around 2:30 a.m. Korea time this morning. That's around 3.5 hours ago. The rockets, thought to be the regime's Nodong missiles, flew for 650 kilometers before splashing into the sea. We'll have more updates for you during Korea Today, coming up in about 45 minutes' time and in our next newscast. Now, with Washington set to hand over wartime control to Seoul at the end of next year, the top commander for U.S. forces in Korea says he's closely monitoring the readiness of Korea-U.S. combined forces to deal with North Korean threats, while pouring efforts into strengthening South Korea's military capabilities. Testifying before the Senate Armed Forces Committee on Tuesday, Army General Curtis Scaparotti says he's reviewing the OPCON transfer so Seoul can continue to enjoy the benefits of the country's military alliance. Seoul had been asking Washington to delay the transfer date from December 2015, citing growing nuclear threats from North Korea. South Korea and the US are expected to set the date at this year's high-level bilateral military talks in October.
We start before the sun rises to bring you the latest stories out of Korea. We also lead the way with important global coverage. Stay on the pulse of what is happening with Daybreak.
Now, the wheels are in motion on President Park Geun-hye's drive towards deregulation. Starting as early as May, it will no longer be illegal for individuals to renovate commercial trucks into food trucks. It comes just 5 days after the president pledged to cut the volume of regulations by 20% over the next 2 years. Connie Kim reports.
In line with President Park Geun-hye's plan to cut regulations on business activities, it'll be legal for individuals and businesses to renovate commercial trucks into food trucks starting as early as May. The Transport Ministry made the announcement Tuesday, and it follows a request by a food truck manufacturer made during a special televised debate last week. Food trucks are currently categorized as special automobiles, and therefore it's illegal to renovate other types of trucks for the purposes of serving food on them. While it normally takes 40 days for such a change to take place, the Transport Ministry plans to expedite the process and shorten the period to 20 days. In other plans, the ministry says it'll ease regulations on the tuning of automobiles and will allow for the renovation of vans into camping cars and vehicles for the disabled by the end of this year. The move comes after President Park Geun-hye last Thursday stressed that reforming current regulatory measures would encourage businesses to invest actively, which would ultimately lead to job creation. President Park pledged to cut the volume of registered regulations to 80% of the current level by 2016. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Korea and New Zealand will hold a sixth round of talks over their bilateral free trade deal in Seoul for 3 days starting today. Korea's trade ministry says the two sides are determined to make progress on areas including rules of origin, trade in services, as well as investment. This is the second time this year that Seoul and Wellington are sitting down for trade talks. The negotiations, which were stalled in May 2010, resumed in February this year, during which the two were unable to narrow differences, especially on the agricultural sector. New Zealand is Korea's 44th largest trading partner, with the bilateral trade volume reaching nearly $3 billion last year. Now, China's economic growth has weakened in recent years, but Korea's finance minister, Hyun Oh-seok, is giving reassurances that the impact will be limited on the Korean economy. Our Hwang Ji-ae has the details.
For Korea's top economic policymaker, the slowing Chinese economy does not appear to be a major concern. During a press briefing on Tuesday, Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok said that the slowdown in the world's second largest economy will not have a major impact on the nation's growth.
Despite the slowdown in emerging economies, export to emerging economies, including China and the ASEAN countries, have remained steady.
He pointed out that 80% of Korea's exports to China are half-finished goods, which are exported again to other nations. Hyun, however, said China's slowing growth could become a risk to the global economy as it could negatively impact financial markets. He said the government would continue to look out for external shocks. Regarding the free trade agreement talks with China, Hyun said he sees no major obstacles ahead, especially with the leaders of the two nations having agreed to finalize trade talks by the end of this year. To push ahead with the government's plan to ease regulations, Hyun pledged to make clear the benefits of cutting down on red tape.
We will make the results of deregulation public so that people can make their own decisions on the government's plan.
Hyun also cited the importance of looking for creative ways to streamline regulations so that the government's drive to bolster corporate investment through deregulation gets a further boost. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
The first female chief conductor of a Korean public orchestra will lead her very first regular performance this week. Song Si-yeon took the reins of the Gyeonggi Philharmonic Orchestra early this year. Our cultural correspondent Park Ji-won gives us a sneak peek.
The Gyeonggi Philharmonic Orchestra is busy rehearsing for its first regular concert this year, where they will perform Mahler's Symphony No. 2, Resurrection. The orchestra is receiving an unusual amount of media attention these days because of its music director, Song Si-yeon. When she was appointed to the position earlier this year, she became Korea's first ever female chief conductor in charge of leading a public orchestra. Blazing trails is nothing new for Song. In 2006, she became the first woman ever to win the prestigious Sir George Shorty International Conductors Competition in Germany. She followed that honor up the next year by winning the Gustav Mahler conducting competition and has worked as the first woman assistant conductor at the Boston Symphony in the United States. She was also the assistant conductor at the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra up until last year. The 38-year-old is well known on the international music scene for her ability to balance orchestral sound. She explains why she chose Mahler's Symphony No. 2 Resurrection as the Gyeonggi Philharmonic Orchestra's first regular concert of 2014.
The Mahler Symphony is majestic and magnificent in its character, and it demands a lot of practice. I wanted to show that the Philharmonic is entering a new phase and show the audience our new determination.
The Gyeonggi Philharmonic Orchestra was founded in 1997 and is full of youthful energy. The average age of its members stands at just 34.
During my 2 years as music director, improving the overall sound of the orchestra is my first priority. I also hope to present good performances by the Gyeonggi Philharmonic on the global music scene.
The Gyeonggi Philharmonic's Mahler Symphony No. 2 concert will be held at 8 p.m. on Thursday at Seoul Arts Center. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, for a look at some of our international headlines we're following this Wednesday morning, we're going to turn over to our Eunice Kim, who's standing by at the news center. Good morning, Eunice.
And good morning, Mark. We'll begin with an update on tensions over Ukraine, including the Russia-annexed Crimea. In The Hague Tuesday, U.S. President Barack Obama put on display his growing rift with Russia by calling it a regional power that's threatening its immediate neighbors not out of strength, but out of weakness. This as CNN reports, citing a U.S. official, that Russia has boosted its military presence along its border with Ukraine by another 10,000 troops. NATO chief Anders Fogh Rasmussen noted he was very much concerned about Russia's military buildup along the border regions and that NATO has plans in place to help defend its allies. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, ultra-nationalist leader Oleksandr Mushenko, who played a role in recent anti-government protests, was reported to have died during a police raid to arrest him. His group, Right Sector, has promised revenge. A sad end and a tragic day. That was how the CEO of Malaysia Airlines framed the latest on missing Flight 370. His comments came one day after Malaysia's Prime Minister announced the passenger jet likely met its end in the southern Indian Ocean. Our Shin Se-min reports.
This is a sad and tragic day for all of us at Malaysia Airlines. This news is clearly devastating for the families of those on board.
The CEO of Malaysia Airlines held a news conference Tuesday in Kuala Lumpur to send his condolences to the family members of the passengers and to outline steps the airline is taking for the families. The airline has offered family members $5,000 for each passenger aboard Flight 370 and additional payments as the search continues. This follows a Malaysian Prime Minister's announcement the day before that the ill-fated flight came down somewhere in the remote southern Indian Ocean with no chance of anyone surviving. Despair and rage exploded among relatives of the Chinese passengers on board that plane in Beijing after receiving the news many had feared but didn't want to believe.
I want to tell the journalists, the information they just sent, it is not true.
In a damning statement given to the media, the families accused Malaysia Airlines and the Malaysian government and military of being, quote, the real executioners who killed the missing jet passengers. They said the shameless behavior misguided and delayed the rescue actions, wasting a large quantity of human resources and materials, and lost valuable time for the rescue effort. The jet vanished on March 8 with 239 people on board after it took off from Kuala Lumpur en route to Beijing. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And turning now to Egypt, where a Cairo court considered the fates of nearly 700 defendants on Tuesday after it handed death sentences to more than 500 others one day before. Among the defendants is the spiritual leader of the now outlawed Muslim Brotherhood, Mohammed Badi. The group is standing trial on charges related to violent riots in August, triggered by a deadly crackdown on supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi. Only 62 of the 682 were present for the trial at Minya Criminal Court. There were also no defense lawyers present Tuesday, as they boycotted the proceedings they deemed unfair. Foreign governments and rights groups agreed the United Nations condemned the mass trials as breaching international law. And at least 17 were killed in the latest string of suicide attacks in Afghanistan on Tuesday as the country gears up to host presidential elections in less than 2 weeks. Among the 3 attacks was one at a Kabul election office. 2 suicide bombers blew themselves up as other Taliban militants stormed the building. A spokesman for the country's interior ministry said 2 police officers, a candidate and an election commission officer were among those killed, but the death toll could have been higher had security forces not engaged them in a firefight. The gun battle is said to have lasted 5 hours before the group of militants were also killed.
Well, it's been over a month since we last saw figure queen Kim Yeon-a's final performance at the Sochi Winter Games, and on Tuesday, her agency, All That Sports, have announced a theme for the upcoming ice show. With their farewell ice show taking place at the Seoul Olympic Gymnastics Gymnasium from May 4th to the 6th, the theme of the ice show will be Adios Gracias, or Goodbye Thank You. A fitting theme for the ice show, as Kim Yeon-a will be joined by some of the top names in figure skating to celebrate her 18 years in the sport and thank her fans who supported her during all those years. Meanwhile, tickets will go on sale April 1st at 7 p.m. local time. And staying on the ice, the South Korean women's curling team, also known as Curls Day, have come back home after finishing 4th during the Curling World Championships in Canada. Despite losing to Russia and failing to earn a bronze medal at the World Championships, the team was welcomed back with a huge crowd of fans and media. The players stated that in place of the bronze medal they missed out on by 1 point, they gained more experience as they hope to continue their success in future international events. Well, speaking of coming back to Korea's sidearm flamethrower, Im Chang-yong, who has been trying to make the Chicago Cubs roster during the spring training, might be returning home as well. The former Samsung Lions closer, who was recently released by the Chicago Cubs, might now be coming back to the KBO, as it was reported that the Cubs have sold the contract to the Samsung Lions. And while the 38-year-old hasn't commented just yet on whether to retire or play, experts believe that with the addition of Im Chang-yong, the Samsung Lions will once again be the favorites to win the title this season. And finishing things off in basketball with Game 2 of the best-of-5 semifinals between the Ulsan Mobis Phoebus and Seoul SK Knights. Now, of course, going into the first quarter here, the SK Knights take a comfortable 19-13 lead before heading into halftime with a 34-28 lead. For the third quarter of the game, Mobis rallies big, taking a 54-49 lead going into fourth quarter. But the SK Knights, with a huge fourth quarter, rallies back with Courtney Sims putting up 17 points and 5 rebounds, as the SK Knights even the series with a 74-69 win. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Well, regions are waking up to lots of clouds this morning with a few drizzle, and it looks like southern provinces will receive lingering showers in the morning hours, but skies should begin to clear shortly, which will allow temperatures to climb to relatively warm side. Daily highs will be similar to what we had yesterday in most regions, but here in the capital, highs will soar to 21 degrees Celsius, so it could feel somewhat hot this afternoon. With that in mind, here are the readings for today. So the morning low in Seoul is starting out at 11. Afternoon high will jump up to 21, and Daegu and Gwangju should top out at 19 and 16 respectively, while Busan should get up to 18. Now for other regions, it looks like down on Jeju will peak to 17, Daejeon will climb up to 19, while the top temperature on Mount Kumgang will be at 14. Well, that's all I have for you at this hour, and hope you have a wonderful day.
Okay, thank you, Jian. Those are the stories we have for you at this hour. Korea Today is coming up in about 30 minutes' time. They'll have the latest on North Korea's latest rocket launches, but we'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.